Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever seen a major company promise to go net zero, and you kind of caught yourself wondering, wait, how does that actually work in the real world? Well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating and honestly sometimes complex ecosystem of the voluntary carbon market. We'll be unpacking the latest data and research to get a really detailed overview of this whole space. We're going to cover everything from exactly why these markets even exist, to the different types of projects, the registries, baselines, and those big integrity reforms that are actively shaping the future of global climate finance. Let's figure out how a simple carbon credit actually translates into genuine, real-world climate action. To really understand why this market exists in the first place, we have to start with a pretty stark reality check. Current projections show that the world is heading for about 2.6 degrees Celsius of warming by the year 2100. And while that is far beyond the 1.5-degree goal laid out in the UN Paris Agreement, the hard truth here is that national climate plans and government funding alone, they just aren't enough to finance the global transition at the speed and scale we desperately need. We literally need every single tool available working at absolute maximum capacity. And right there is where the financial stakes come into play. To bridge this massive funding gap, we have to mobilize private capital. According to S&P Global Sustainable One, the voluntary carbon market could reach a massive annual value of up to $4 billion by 2030. Think about that for a second. That represents billions of dollars flowing directly into climate mitigation projects around the globe, financing huge economic transformations that otherwise simply would not be financially viable. Okay, let's dive right into this roadmap. 1. Why carbon markets exist. 2. The anatomy of a credit. 3. The 3 pillars of truth. 4. Registries and the rulemakers. 5. Making credible corporate claims. And 6. The future of high integrity. Section 1. Why carbon markets exist. Bridging the funding gap. So, at the very foundation of this entire market is a beautifully simple equation. 1 carbon credit equals exactly 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide, or its equivalent in other greenhouse gases that has been reduced, avoided, or completely removed from the atmosphere. That is the foundational currency we're dealing with. When a company wants to take responsibility for emissions they can't quite cut from their own operations yet, they purchase these credits to compensate. And once a credit is used for this purpose, it's officially retired. That means it can never be traded or claimed by anyone else ever again. So how does that ton of carbon actually make its way to a buyer? Well, it moves through a very specific supply chain. Upstream, you've got your project developers. These are the people out there actually planting the trees, protecting the forests, or building that massive direct air capture technology. Midstream, you have retail traders and brokers. They buy these credits, bundle them into neat portfolios, and basically grease the wheels of the market. And finally, downstream, you have the end buyers. These are the major corporations, the airlines, or sometimes even everyday individuals purchasing the credits to offset their unavoidable emissions. Section 2. The anatomy of a credit. Not all are equal. Now, what's really interesting here is the fundamental difference between avoiding carbon and removing it. Avoidance credits fund projects that stop greenhouse gases from entering the atmosphere in the first place. Think of things like replacing dirty fossil fuel energy with clean cookstoves or throwing up a shield to stop the deforestation of a critical rainforest. Removal credits, on the exact other hand, actively extract existing CO2 right out of the air. This could be planting brand new forests or utilizing high-tech direct air capture machines. Because removals actively draw down historic emissions and, let's face it, are usually a lot more expensive to implement, these credits typically trade at a pretty significant premium. We also really have to look at the timing of when these carbon savings actually happen. In this space, we have ex-ante and ex-post credits. Ex-ante credits are essentially an advance payment based on anticipated future carbon savings. They're a bit higher risk, sure, but they provide the absolutely vital upfront cash needed to get a massive project like a new forest off the ground. Ex-post credits, though, are issued only after the carbon reduction or removal has actually been achieved and scientifically verified. Because they carry much lower uncertainty, they are the gold standard for making highly credible net zero claims. Section 3. The 3 pillars of truth. Ensuring credit value. The first pillar here is additionality, and honestly, it is the fundamental barrier test for any project. Additionality basically means the project exists because the carbon credit funded it, not despite it. The project developer has to definitively prove that without the revenue from selling those carbon credits, their project just wouldn't be financially viable, or maybe wouldn't be able to overcome certain regulatory or technological roadblocks. Put yourself in the shoes of a carbon auditor for just a second. Imagine a farmer switches to sustainable cover crops simply because, well, it makes good agronomic sense and naturally increases their crop yield anyway. That does not generate an additional carbon credit because they were going to do it regardless. But if they adopt a highly complex, really expensive new crop rotation purely because the carbon market revenue covers that extra cost and financial risk, yes, that is additional. In that case, the market has actually caused brand new climate action. The second pillar is permanence. A re-emitted ton of carbon has absolutely zero climate value. So standards dictate exactly how long carbon must stay locked away, often anywhere from 20 to 100 years. But nature's wild and unpredictable, right? What happens if a protected forest just burns down? To guarantee permanence, registries use an ingenious little insurance policy called a buffer pool. It's basically a community savings account. A percentage of every single project's credits, say 20%, is withheld in a collective non-tradable pool. If a fire or a sudden disease wipes out a project's carbon stock, credits are just drawn directly from this buffer pool to compensate for the loss, ensuring the atmosphere remains perfectly balanced. The third and final pillar is the baseline. This is the counterfactual scenario. It describes exactly what would have happened if the project never existed. The baseline is absolutely vital because it determines exactly how many credits a project is allowed to issue. If you use an overly generous baseline, say really exaggerating how badly a forest would have been completely logged without your intervention, you artificially inflate the number of credits you can claim, and we definitely want to avoid that. Which brings us to a major shift happening right now in carbon accounting. Historically, a lot of projects used static baselines. They just froze the initial state of the land and measured against that single point in time forever, even if regional practices naturally improved over the next 10 years. Today, high-integrity standards demand dynamic baselines. These actively track evolving regional trajectories and are reassessed every few years. It's much stricter, and yeah, it often reduces the total number of tons a project might claim, but it vastly strengthens the real-world credibility of every single credit issued. Section 4. Registries and the Rulemakers. Governance. For a long time, the voluntary carbon market was heavily criticized as being a bit of a Wild West. But think about the early stock market before the massive crash of 1929. It took time for real oversight bodies like the SEC to form. The carbon market is maturing in that exact same way. Today, independent governance bodies like the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, or ICVCM, are stepping in. They've created what they call the core carbon principles to act as a global quality benchmark, rigorously assessing methodologies and establishing standardized, high-integrity regulations across the entire board. And the entities actually issuing these credits and meticulously tracking the projects are the registries. Consider this your quick cheat sheet. Choosing a registry dictates the methodologies used and acts as a primary quality signal for buyers. Verra is the giant in the room, handling the largest volume, especially in massive nature-based solutions. Gold Standard, which was actually founded by the WWF, specializes in ensuring projects have deep, verifiable social and community co-benefits. Puro.earth focuses intensely on durable engineered technological carbon removals. And then you have ACR and the Climate Action Reserve, which are major players focused heavily on the North American markets. Section 5. Making credible corporate claims. Preventing greenwashing. To prevent the ever-present threat of greenwashing, the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, or VCMI, has established some very strict prerequisites. A company cannot simply buy a bunch of credits to paper over bad practices. Before they can even make a public claim, they must meet foundational criteria. They have to publicly disclose their greenhouse gas inventory, set near-term science-based targets to actually decarbonize their own operations, commit to net zero by 2050, and ensure their public policy lobbying fully aligns with the Paris Agreement. The golden rule here is reduce first, compensate second. Now, recognizing that cleaning up a massive global supply chain takes time, the VCMI recently introduced a very specific practical guardrail, the Scope 3 Flexibility Claim. This basically allows companies to use high-integrity credits to cover a maximum of 50% of their indirect value chain emissions, which are known as Scope 3 emissions. But here is the major catch. That 50% allowance steadily declines to absolute zero by 2035. It gives companies short-term flexibility for those really hard-to-abate supply chains while forcing long-term, real-world, direct decarbonization. It's a really smart balance. Section 6. The Future of High Integrity, a Core Climate Policy. So, the crucial point we really need to take away is perfectly summarized by Annette L. Nazareth, the chair of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. As she notes, a high integrity voluntary carbon market is a vital, complementary tool to mobilize billions in climate finance, but it is never, ever a replacement for robust policy action or rapid internal decarbonization within a company's own value chain. Credits sit alongside real economy emission reductions, they do not replace them. The voluntary carbon market is rapidly shedding its old Wild West image, and it's moving aggressively toward a future built on rigorous, standardized integrity under global frameworks like the Paris Agreement's Article 6. As these strict new rules take hold globally, it brings up a really critical question for all of us. As the bar for quality rises, how will you or your organization leverage these evolving markets to support a genuine, impactful climate transition? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.